Hey, Guy from New Plastic, and today we'll make one of my favorite upholstery materials, Bouclé. Before we get into it, this video is sponsored by my own store since we're independent. So I have a whole fuzzy fabrics pack you can check out on my Gumroad that includes different bouclés, fur, fleece, and other fluffy and fuzzy types of fabrics, along with 10 other different fabrics packs, all 100% procedural with not a single image used for Octane in Cinema 4D. They look ridiculously good and cover a vast variety of fabric textures like satin, velvets, knits, weaved, suits, sheers, and much more. Overall, there are 159 materials, but I already have a few more that I'll add to it, which you can also get as a full pack for a cheaper price. Since they're procedural, they're infinitely tileable with no repetitions, endlessly customizable, and you can render them at any resolution without breaking them. So yeah, super proud of this pack. If you feel like it can help you, I'll leave the links in the description. Also, you can buy some of the pins and posters I made on my other Gumroad, so check them out as well. Beyond that, consider supporting on Patreon or membership, where you can find these project files, free products, and other cool perks, but mostly help me make more and better content for y'all. Follow me on Instagram at ojang or the channel at brandnewplastic. Subscribe, share, comment, go watch Beau is Afraid. I literally just watched it an hour ago, and man, Ari Aster, man, he's our boy. He's our visionary director, and I'm just so here for it. I promise you, watch it. You won't leave the theaters without feeling something. Anyway, let's go. So real quick, bouclé is a type of fabric used mostly for upholstery, but I've seen some clothes made out of it. It's basically weaved yarn that's been looped, which results in these curls or pebbles sticking out. There are many types of bouclé looks, so you can really go crazy with this, but we're going to focus on two looks, one a bit more simpler and the other slightly more complex. Let's start from a flat plane so we can see better what we're doing. Let's add a universal material, BRDF mode to STD. Let's add a composite node with 3 layers. Space everything out nicely, plug into the albedo channel, and let's add a moire or moire node to the first layer. Let's solo, and we're not seeing it, and I was trying to figure out why for a second before I realized the material wasn't on the plane. So okay, let's scale it down significantly, change shape to circles, size pretty large around 1, and blur pretty hard around 0.9. And change shift to 0 so they're aligned in a perfect grid. Let's add a projection node set at distorted UVs. Add a noise to the translation channel. And add a tiny bit of translation like 0.008 and minus 0.005 to the X and Y. The distortion frequency is too large, so let's scale down the noise and play with the noise settings till we're getting some nice subtle distortion. We don't want to completely destroy the circle shapes, but we definitely want some wobbliness. Let's also add a gradient node and change type to cubic, which will kind of add a faster transition to white. Let's add this noise to the second layer using a UVW transform. Add a gradient node and choke the notches in a bit. Scale it up a bit. And change blend mode to a multiply. If you think of this as a displacement map, we're adding height variety to these pebbles. Reduce the opacity a bit, and let's add a gradient to the whole thing to give it some color. We'll do some grayish cream on the dark side and a very light bright cream on the bright side, and grab the middle and drag it to the dark areas to kind of choke in the dark areas. We're really only getting those darker areas on the edges. Let's apply the material on the fabric model, and let's add a noise to the bump channel. Change type to chips and scale it down, but stretch the y-axis. Something like this, so we're faking these small fibers. Add a projection node set at distorted UVs and plug the moire node into the translation using a gradient node. Let's make the gradient very mid-gray, so very low contrast, and use very, very low values on the translation. So we're just barely affecting it. And we can squeeze this noise even more. Okay, let's add a displacement node. Plug the composite node into it using a baking texture. Make the height around 1, which is pretty high, but we can adjust it later. Change resolution to 4K, change the baking resolution to 4K, HDR type, but you can test out the LDR as well, and up the samples. And we're looking pretty good. Definitely feels fluffy, maybe a bit too fluffy. But let's add another composite node with 2 layers, plug the color gradient to the first layer, and the bump fiber noise to the second layer's mask using a gradient node, and plug in RGB node to the second layer. Plug this into the albedo channel, and we can make the RGB color some darker shade, maybe change the blend mode to overlay. So yeah, now we can make the RGB much darker, and we can see we're adding some more fiber detail with some subtle darker colors. Okay, I like it a lot. Let's scale down the material using the length X and Y. Maybe increase the opacity of the second layer noise to add more variety to the whole thing. Yeah, that's cool. I can also maybe scale down the UV distortion noise to get a slightly stronger distortion. Test out different noise types. Cool. And I can just plug this whole thing to the sheen roughness using a gradient node, up the sheen, and decrease the contrast on the gradient. So now we're getting some very subtle and nice sheen on it. It would stick out more if the colors were darker. And actually, I'll plug the bump noise into the third layer here, change blend mode to multiply, and really bring down the opacity. So we're getting even more detail coming from the displacement and sheen now. Okay, I love it. Feels super tangible and soft. And to add even more feel to it, I can add a hair object to it, make it pretty short. We can bring down the amount of guides to reduce the burden on the viewport. And really bring down the thickness. We can turn on curl, which won't add a coil type curl, but more curl each hair onto itself. I don't know if you could tell here. Maybe this is too strong. So let's bring the curl down a bit. Let's also add some kink and frizz. And apply a hair material on it with some light cream or gray color. Nice, it's still too thick, so let's bring down the thickness even more. Maybe add some noise to it to get a variety of thickness. Change the color to more cream. Increase the hair amount. And yeah, even less thickness. I really just want some subtle fuzz. I mean, this is so sick. Close-ups will still be a bit problematic, but we can increase the resolution to 8K. And actually for the final render, I changed the displacement type to vertex. The baking texture ended up giving me some weird issues, which is why I usually avoid it when it comes to procedural work. Cool. Love how it came out. Let's try a slightly different look now. Again, starting with a flat plane, universal material, BRDF mode to STD. Let's add a composite node with 4 layers. And actually, let's add 5 layers just to be safe. I hate adding a layer after everything is set up because it kind of has this bug that messes up the whole node system. Okay, let's turn off all the layers except the first 2. And let's start with a moire node, change shape to circles. And actually, let's plug this whole thing to the albedo and the moire into the second layer and solo it. Okay, let's bring down the size, blur it out. And that seems fine for now. Let's add a transform node and scale it way down. Add a projection node set at distorted UVs. And add a noise to the translation channel. Up the X range, but nothing is happening because the noise is too big. So let's scale down the noise. Let's make the noise a bit more interesting and detailed. Up the X range, and let's play with the scale. And we're starting to see some distortion. Lower the details a bit and lower the X range. It's a back and forth thing. And yeah, that seems fine, just a subtle wobbliness. Cool, let's add another noise. Plug it into the third layer. Scale it down. Type to circular. Up the octaves. Lower the omega. Just a little bit. And up the gamma so we expose the blacks a bit more. Let's add a gradient node and make the blacks some middle gray. then use the same noise through a gradient node to mask itself. So the noise is now transparent wherever it's black. And maybe choke the blacks a little bit. Now I could just change the blend mode to add and get a similar effect, but doing it this way allows me first of all to have more individual control, so I can control how much of the blacks are getting masked out without affecting the noise itself and vice versa. And the second thing is that if I use the add blend, the whites from this noise will be added on top of the white circles from the bottom and increase the amount of white, which I don't want. This way the white areas are getting mixed more neutrally and are in a way staying normalized. Hope that makes sense. Okay, let's plug this noise with a UVW transform into the fourth layer, change blend mode to multiply, and this just helps break up the whole thing and add some imperfections. And we can rotate it and scale it down. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Let's go back to the second layer and use the moire node to mask itself using a gradient node. Choke the blacks a little bit. And now the first layer is showing through the black areas of the moire node. Let's add a marble node to the first layer. Scale it way down. Let's plug the same distorted UV's projection node to it. And since we want this layer to be at a lower height than everything else, let's darken the white parts with a gradient node. And now we have a subtle thread pattern in between all these circles. Okay, cool. Let's add a gradient node to the whole thing and add some colors. Give some light cream color to the bright areas and some green or whatever you want to the dark areas. All these colors are up to you, you know. And just kind of spread the nodes out in a way that creates this separation between the green and the cream areas. Maybe add a slightly darker cream right at the edges, which will add a bit more depth to the whole cream area. Okay, we can go back to this in a minute. Let's add a color correction so we can easily change the colors if we want to. And let's add this material to the fabric model so we can start creating the rest of this material. Let's bring the specular to 0, plug the composite node to the bump channel using a gradient node, plug the color correction node into the sheen channel using another color correction node, and brighten the whole thing up. So now whatever we do to the original color correction node, the sheen layer will be directly affected by it and kind of automatically brightening it. And if we up the sheen roughness, let's see if we're getting anything. Yeah, we're getting some subtle sheen. So let's plug the composite node into a gradient node and into the bottom layer of an add mix node, and plug this noise into the top layer using a gradient node. And let's make the bottom layer slightly darker and kind of choke the top layer. Let's actually add a UVW transform to the top layer and scale it way down. So we're getting all this small white noise over everything. Cool. Maybe darken it a little now. And let's compare to see if we're actually getting anything. Very subtle. The darker the sheen roughness channel is, the less the sheen will spread out and be noticeable. So I think we can brighten this whole thing up. Even more. We're just getting very subtle brightening of the shaded areas of the cream parts. Let's choke the brightness of the top layer even more. Okay, yeah, much more noticeable. And we can probably use the same node on the sheen bump channel using a gradient node. And if the sheen bump or the regular bump channel are too strong, it sometimes can really mess up stuff like fine wrinkles or fine details. It just kind of bugs out the whole thing. So let's make this sheen bump very subtle by darkening the white on the gradient. Okay, we're getting somewhere, but we're not there. Make the dark cream color slightly brighter. Change the bump gradient type to cubic. And maybe make the bump slightly more subtle by decreasing the contrast. Okay, slightly better. I mean, we're also super zoomed in, so let's scale down the whole material using the length X and Y. I mean, it definitely has a certain feel. I think the green areas are showing too much. Let's reveal some more of the cloudy noise, and also reveal more of the circles. We can also make the green slightly brighter and less saturated. Okay, let's add a displacement node, keep it at texture type, change height to like 0.2, resolution to 4K, and plug the whole composite to it using a gradient node. And since we're on texture type, we'll need a baking texture node as well to bake the procedural maps. Up the resolution to 4K. Okay, I want these cloudy noises to show less of the circles underneath. So let's choke the whites on the mask. So we're exposing the white areas more. Okay, that's cool. But I want less white patches overall. So let's lower the gamma. And that's actually the opposite of what I wanted. But damn, that's a pretty cool look. Feels really fuzzy. But no, I need to up the gamma. Maybe scale it down and up the gamma even more. Okay, let's up the contrast on the green threads just a bit, just for a bit more detail. Okay, we're looking pretty good. Maybe up the imperfection noise opacity. Yeah, I really like how this is looking. Maybe slightly lower the gamma on the cloudy noise just to add more fluff. And what we can do actually is to add some hair over the whole thing. Nothing too crazy. Make the hair really short, make it much thinner. And we can just use the color here or add an Octane hair material. Add some tightening, which will pull the hair onto the surface a bit more. I can barely notice it, so let's up the thickness. I think the displacement is overlapping the hair a bit, so let's increase the length and add some kink. And we can increase the tightness now that it's longer to pull it onto the surface even more. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, I don't want to really focus on the hair part, but yeah, it definitely makes it feel much more fuzzy. Now, I actually went back to the material and I wanted to just make some final adjustments. So let's up the details on the UV distortion noise and up the translation range to increase the level of distortion. The circles felt way too uniform when I went back to look at them. Maybe scale down the noise even more. Yeah, let's also increase the size of the circles. And one thing I want to do, which might seem kind of pointless, but it's the small details that matter. Let's move the two top layers up the ladder. So we're making space for a new third layer. Let's just make some more space here. Okay, now into that third layer, we're going to plug the moire node with a gradient node and use the cloud noise with a gradient node to mask it out. But we'll reverse the notches on the gradient so the circles are masked out by the white areas of the cloud noise. Let's choke the hell out of that mask. Make the moire gradient darker and change the blend mode to add. Okay, yeah, we're barely making any difference. Let's dial it in a bit more. Let's try to choke the mask gradient the other way. And actually, let's add some color to the moire gradient so we can understand the effect better. So yeah, no, bring back the mask gradient to how it was. Let's scale down the imperfection noise and up the opacity a bit. Okay, it's way too small. Let's scale it back up and stretch it slightly. Okay, down the opacity again a bit. Let's solo this third layer mask gradient and maybe we'll choke it somewhere in the middle. Yeah, something like this. Bring the color back to gray, change blend mode to add again, and also brighten the fourth layer mask noise as well. So the cloud noise has stronger whites. And if we turn off the third layer, we can see we're just very subtly brightening up the circles without flattening the white parts. So we're hopefully keeping the transition from white to black rich enough for them to curve out smoothly when displaced. I find it to help, but maybe I'm tripping. Very fine displacements tend to look very stiff and linear, almost like they're chiseled. So I'm just trying to soften them up by subtly adjusting the grayscale information. And if we plug the displacement node back in, I mean, yeah, I think it looks better. Maybe up the imperfection opacity a bit to break the smoothness. Okay, last couple of moves. Let's up the details on the cloud noise just a bit. and up the gamma to reveal less white areas. Then choke in the mask brightness to make the now smaller white areas stronger. Okay, yes, much better. Very subtle changes, but they make a big difference. We can maybe open up the green color just a tiny bit and maybe bring out more of the black parts of the marble layer and make the green slightly brighter so we can notice those green details a bit more. Yes, and maybe even increase the displacement height. I mean, I fucking love it. This definitely has that bouclé feel that I love so much. Okay, that's it. Some more procedural love for ya. We're really hammering these techniques in, but that's how you really learn. We use the same batch of tricks to get a variety of different looks and expand on them. Check out the fuzzy pack or the rest of the procedural fabrics packs on my Gumroad. Check out the posters and enamel pins on my other Gumroad. Links in the description. Consider supporting on Patreon, and a fluffy, warm hug to all my cozy patrons and members. Yin and Gong, Guillaume Lopez, Dave Toro, Marie Robbins, Svoyas Chari, Eric Hu, Daniel Larry, Menki Kim, Adair, Leo, Peter Odiger, Shin Yunji, Chris Hyde, Alda Boyd, Farong Farong, Katie Royal, Derek Fredrickson, Nico Sun, Ruby9, Lucas Ranche, Tell Me More, Juskirat Pandrath, Bori, Jingquan Wu, Bruno Arredondo, Domestic God in the House, Toby T, Fareed Ali, David Lesser, Adam Trexler, Everyday Swiss, Seamus Johnson, General Zods, Kevin Bellew, Call In, Amir Bahadur Ashrafzadeh, Simon Sturm, Mr. Hoptaz, Sebastian Reuter, Henriette Marie-Jean Glickstein, who's my mom, so thanks mom, you're sweet. 3D Monkey Biz, Arlen, Suki Violet Sue, The 22 Design, Joel Rieger, Adrian Desolé, Derek Schultz, Marie Sickendorf, Studi Image, Matus Jadrzejewski, Blue Hamill, Mark Reagan, Joshua Akoy, Punksakornim Siri, Webb, Kong Idiot, Maddie DeGueldre, Cho Yun Jun, NZE, IEMN, Golfino666, Ali Esser, Leandro Marimon, May, Balgasm, Shane, Perry Cooper, Anna Kazeka, Oysen O'Brien, Joel Taylor, Faux Major, Kevin E. Quintero, Jeremy Bajana, Christina, Yatsu, Raquel Vela, Ezekiel Grand, Alex Jin Young Cho, Matessa Rakosi, Onur Kuroglu, Takeyuki Chiba, Pablo Ritter, Sophia Wilton, David Hughes, Kim Je, Riverstar 2190, LSD Honey, Monsif Canada, Alice Saturnus, Hugo Esconde, Ozan Shahin, Kudo ES, Sinna, The Rusted Pixel, Alexandra Olduk, and everybody else on the list. Thank you so much. I love you. Have a great day. Peace.